I wanted to take a few minutes to go over how to round, since I noticed that this has been an area of struggle for many of us. You're doing all the hard math right, but then you get to the end and then you make mistakes with the rounding. So here we go. Rounding boot camp. Here's basic rounding. Number 1 says round your answer to the nearest tenth. All of these questions are examples of what you might see on, let's say, like a test or a Regents exam or homework assignment. So in number 1, we want to round to the nearest tenth. So we're going to look at the tenths place value, which is an 8, and then look to the next number. If it's a 5 or higher, the 8 will be bumped up or whatever that might be. So your final answer would just be 13 point, in this case, 9, because the 5 bumps the 8 up to a 9. Number 2, round your answer to the nearest hundredth. The hundredths place value, well, it's tenths, then hundredths. So we're going to look at the 5, use the 9 to help us to see that everything else stays the same. So 13.8, and we're going to decide, is the 5 going to stay in a 5, or is it going to be bumped up to a 6? And it will be bumped up to a 6. The hundredths value should be the only value that you see now. The last one, I should say. Number 3, round your answer to the nearest thousandth. So tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Okay, 9s can sometimes get tricky, especially if you have to round up, which we do because it's an 8. So lots of rounding up here. So 13.8. Now here's the catch. The 9 has to be bumped up to a 10. But we can't write a 10 in its place value. We can, however, write a 0. So what ends up happening is that we have to bring the 1 over to the 5. So this is one of the trickiest cases that you will see, but notice how I included the 0, because it said the nearest thousandth, which means that we need to see the thousandths place value, the third decimal, as the last value, even if it's a 0. All right, so 4, round your answer to the nearest whole number. The nearest whole number means get rid of any decimals. So we're just going to look at the 3 in this case. This should be x is equal to, well, the 3, if you look at the 8, gets bumped up to a 4. So we would use 14. Number 5, it's basically the same thing as number 4, except integers could be positive or negative. In this case, our number is positive. And you know what? I'm going to change this number for a second. Okay, so I'm just changing the number just because I wanted to get a better example. I felt like I just kept rounding up. In this case, if we're rounding to the nearest integer, the integer means just get rid of, again, decimals, because integers are positive and negative whole numbers. So the 3 is the same thing, just like what I looked at in question 4. And in this case, I'm going to keep it the same. So I'm not going to round down, I just leave it as 13. Those are the basic types of rounding questions. If we move into context, let's read about these guys here. Number 6 says round your answer to the nearest degree. So a fancy way of saying the nearest degree is, okay, 75 degrees, 32 degrees, so on and so forth. There are no decimals, so get rid of the decimals. So again, we look at the ones place value and realize that our answer here, and because it's in context, it's important to write it out. So here, or label, I should say, not just write it out. So 82.5 would become 83, and let's say degrees. They didn't say Celsius or Fahrenheit, so we'll just leave it as degrees. 7, round your answer to the nearest year. Again, all they're saying is lose the decimal in a fancy way. So here's a 5. And let's look to the right, and we can see the 5 stays a 5. So our answer would be x equals 5 years. Okay, number 8, round your answer to the nearest dollar. That means, again, get rid of the decimals. Look at the ones value, or the ones place value, I should say, and what happens here? Well, the 9 has to be bumped up to a 10, so this is a tricky case where we also have to worry about the 1 So x would equal, and we're dealing with dollars, so let's put our dollar sign in the front of the number, 2,400, and in this case it would be 20, because remember the 9 had to have been bumped up to a 10, so the 1, this is a special case like what we saw up above where we had to adjust the 1. That doesn't happen very often, but it sometimes will happen. All right, lastly, this is a kind of a pet peeve of mine. If it says, what is the cost per pound of beef, and you end up getting this as your answer, you're wrong. Because that's not how we write out money. Is this how we write out money? No, what we have to do is put that 0 in as a placeholder, because when we're dealing with dollars and cents, our cents, we always have 2 place values. So there we have it. There's our rounding in a nutshell. If I'm feeling creative, maybe I'm going to throw some questions on the end of this video and hope that you do well on them. And I guess I should have started out in the beginning of the video saying that you can or can't take notes. It's entirely up to you. I would suggest that you do, especially if you think that rounding is a problem for you. But maybe if you get all the questions right at the end of the video, that's all you needed is a good memory refresher. So you can pause the video, stop the video, rewind it, go back and rewatch it and take notes if you need to.